My name is Osvaldo, but please call me Ozzy, much easier. And I'm founder and CEO of Elastera. This is a talk that my co-founder, not myself, but my co-founder, Zach Stevens, and chief architect of Elastera did at reInvent, AWS reInvent in Las Vegas. So I'm kind of improvising, and hopefully, it will go well. So, Elastera, very quickly. Elastera is my fourth startup. I was co-founder and CTO of Venda, pioneering in 2001 of SaaS e-commerce, recently acquired by NetSuite. My co-founder, Zach Stevens, also was a key architect at Venda. Among our advisors and investors, we have leading exponents of Lean, such as Dan Jones, father of Lean, Eric Ries, father of Lean Startup. These Lean things is core to what we do, and I think it's very important to our clients. These are some of the clients we help and serve. Now, I want to provide a little bit of context here, why we do what we do. So until recently, online retailers had to choose between a SaaS-based solution or go down the do-it-yourself path. That means using e-commerce platforms such as, for example, ATG, WebSphere, Magento, obviously, and they manage everything from system integrators to hosting, performance, and security, scalability, all these kind of things. And now, what we've seen that whatever approach the retailer use, they're never happy. And the reason because each solution has their own plus and minuses. The negatives with SaaS is the retailers are renting a platform, okay, and inevitably they will hit constraints. And with the DIY solutions, the negatives are hefty tax on managing the overall complexity. On the positive side, SaaS makes it very easy by removing the complexity, and the total cost of ownership is pretty low and predictable. With the DIY solution, the positives are that the merchant owns the platform, and they have the freedom to do and customize things, whenever they want. So we thought that this solution would be the best of both, trying to provide the benefits of both solutions and not the negatives. And so this is so what we do. We provide a managed cloud solution for Magento merchants on AWS cloud. We are like a platform as a service, you can define it. Basically, developers, agencies, or retailers, they don't really have to care about operations, technical operations. The only thing they care about is coding and deploy their code. Okay, so let's move into more details. Well, what are our objectives? The objectives are to be able to run Magento code as it is on the infrastructure, and also be able to efficiently manage many Magento sites, because obviously as the number of clients increase, we need to be efficient with that. And also be able to evolve the infrastructure, which is a fairly interesting concept, not just look at it like a static thing that you need to write off every 3-5 years to be able to move on. Okay, now, it might seem that our infrastructure problems are pretty specialized, but they're not. It's in reality, what matters to us is what matters to you as well. You will be facing, even at smaller scale, this kind of issues, because even though we have to manage different clients, but even you will have to manage different environments. For example, even if you are a merchant, you have one site. But just the very fact that you have to manage different environments, they pose some some problems, challenges. Now, most customers migrate from their platform, Magento, obviously, and they need to run on our platform without changing the code. So that's very important, and we just want to remove all the difficulties of technical operations. So this is a typical familiar infrastructure environment. So this is kind of high level. Now we start getting to a bit more details. Okay, so when you look at Magento on the cloud, on AWS, you will see that there are lots of moving parts, many. Obviously, things like, the EC2 instances, load balancers, typical things. But that doesn't stop there. There are many other things to be concerned about: security, NAT gateways, EBS volumes, and all these kind of things. So as I said, there are lots of moving parts. We need to bundle all of them together and be able to deliver that to any Magento client, whether they are Magento 1, Magento 2, Community Edition, Enterprise Edition. Now we get pretty quickly into some more details, so that you get a little bit of familiarity with AWS. First of all, CloudFormation. Okay, CloudFormation is a way on AWS to describe what the infrastructure needs to be like through a JSON file. And that's an easy way to build and automate the setup of an infrastructure and manage it. At Elastera, we make very little use of it because we found out that there are much better ways of dealing with infrastructure as a code and managed infrastructure. But I think nevertheless it's quite important to understand the principles of how things work within cloud. Okay, typically the first approach is for people to create one single cloud formation template. So you describe all of your resources in that template as a JSON file. And that's it. Once you've done it, and this is great achievement, you can set up your own environment. But with this approach, can quickly, easily, you can quickly create infrastructure, copy of the infrastructure, which can be very handy if you want to have pre-production environments. Okay. However, things will start becoming a little more difficult if you want to evolve the infrastructure. So, for example, let's take an example where you expand into a different country. You want to have a new domain for that specific country. I don't know, yoursite.com instead of .co.uk. And all of a sudden, you have a problem there where you need to have, in AWS terms, a new ELB, a new load balancer, where you can have the domain and you can then apply the specific SSL certificate. You cannot use the same load balancer. You will have to create a new one. However, the problem is that now you will have to create a new template just to make the little modification. Okay, so you're duplicating the template. And now things start becoming a little bit more difficult, as you can imagine. The best way actually is for the infrastructure to evolve easily, to be able to break down the big template of CloudFormation into small parts, okay, where you can better identify the standard components and their configurations and everything else, okay, and you can reuse them. So the use of this kind of narrowly focused template allows us to deliver mass customization. If one side needs a special configuration for some part of the stack, like load balancers, as we said before, we can swap just that little template and we can leave all the rest intact, okay? So in this case, for example, we would only change this template and we could reuse these other templates, which is, pretty much what you would do with your code typically, okay? In fact, by no chance, this type of approach to manage infrastructure is called infrastructure as a code. It's very important in order to have repeatability and standards. So why is it important to have infrastructure as a code, to actually manage infrastructure with code, is because as you make changes, you want those changes to be standardized. Many of you have been through situations where, for example, you had a change made in pre-production environment, you deploy the code on live, and someone forgot to make the change on live, and things went badly wrong. What you want to do is to be able to codify those infrastructure changes alongside your code, and be able to put that on Git and be able to manage it on different environments, pre-production, production, so that those changes will be applied, will not be forgotten, will be applied for all these existing sites or clients, but most importantly also applied to future clients or future sites as well. So you don't have to remember and reapply those changes. This is just a small example of a change which was needed on MySQL specifically for certain versions of Magento. And that's one of those things. Once you know it, you went through the problem, you've built your knowledge through the problem solving, and once you've done that, you would like to productize this knowledge. You don't want to invent the wheel, or or even put a checklist in place which people might look at or not. So be able to codify these kind of things makes life much easier. Now, one of the benefits of cloud is obviously auto scaling. Let's talk a little bit about that, so we can dispel some myths as well. And typical example, you send a newsletter, let's say 6 o'clock, you get a spike in visitors, and which then goes down at around after an hour or so. Now, typically the spike in visitors might create a spike in CPU utilizations on your servers. And now let's say, for example, that after 80% utilization, the user experience starts deteriorating. This is what it looks like. So for a period of, let's say, 65 minutes, the user will not have a good experience. And this is typical of dedicated infrastructures. Once these kind of things happen, you have nowhere to go. You're stuck. You just have to wait for this traffic to go down, and that's not great. And this is where auto-scaling comes handy. However, let's talk a bit more depth about auto-scaling. And the question is, how quickly can you scale? Now, in AWS, you have something called MAI. MAI is basically an image that you make of your specific environments, like EC2 instances, your web servers, let's say. But then that's not it, because you also need to be able to put all the system software, obviously the Magento code and the specific configuration. So there are a number of steps you have to go through. Now, if you start with this kind of approach where the MAI bakes only the operating system, and then you have to go through the setup of everything else, like Apache, Nginx, PHP, Chef, running New Relic, setting up all these kind of things, it will take a little while. Let's say it might take 20 minutes. So with this approach, basically you will be able to scale after 20 minutes. So the new instances, once they realize that something, the CPU utilization goes up, here starts the auto scaling, but the service will be operational only after 20 minutes. Now, compared with what happened before, it's much better, but still, you're providing bad experience for 20 minutes. That's not great at all, okay? Can we do better? Yes, we can do better. So what we can do is to bake into the MAI a bit more than just the operating system. We can put the basic system software, so Nginx and Apache, PHP, all these kind of things, so that we don't have to do extra work in setting up the server as it comes up. So let's say this typically would take around 5 minutes, and this makes a big difference, because all of a sudden, as the peaks goes up, immediately auto scaling kicks in. After 5 minutes, you have 1, 2, 3 new servers operational. They can absorb the traffic, and therefore you only provide 5 minutes degradation experience to your end user. Still, that's not great. What do you need to provide for means of bad experience to your user? There is no point for that. So auto scaling is great, but there is nothing that beats proactive scaling. So what it means that if you probably your marketing department knows that the newsletter is being sent out. If you ask them, tell me a day before, they might be a little bit tricky. But if you ask them, can you tell me 10 minutes, 20 minutes before, they will probably can do that, right? So you just ask them, tell me 20 minutes before, you send a newsletter with 50% discount, they do that, you auto scale and you provide the resources which will be needed at that point, so there will be no bad experience for the end user at the end of the day. So auto scanning is great, but it's great where things unexpected happen, but still, if you can plan things, that's even better. Let's talk about deployment a little bit. So we get into a little bit more depth, because now you understand that you can scale, you can get new websites, new servers up. You need to do certain amount of configuration of setup. If you use software like Chef, Puppet for configuration management, that's great. But it's another tool, another language to learn. It's not straightforward. But let's get into deployment. Now, one way to make the setup of a new web server quicker would be to include Magento code into the MAI. So it's about baking Magento code into it, so that you can start a new server. All of this will be ready almost immediately. The only thing you need to do is just to make aware the application, where the database is, where Redis is, and all these kind of things. However, the problem with this is every time you deploy the code, you need to create a new Amazon image. And that can be quite inconvenient, especially if you deploy code quite rapidly. And also to create those images takes time. It's very resource intensive. It might take 30 minutes to create an image. So they might not be the best approach. It can be if you need speed of new instances to be very, very quick. The way we approach it is slightly different. We bake things into the image, Amazon image, until to this point, and then we let the web servers to pull the code, the Magento code, the specific custom code. So this is, we go through into more details about that. Bear with me, I was totally, completely unprepared, as you can see. I just had to improvise this. So, so here are the essential components of the deployment systems. Obviously, developer. Then we have something called the deployment service, which orchestrates everything. S3 buckets, where we put the code, and then we have the different environments, let's say live or staging. So next we have the S3, in S3 bucket we put a Magento code, and finally we see the Magento instances. When the developer makes the deployment, we'll indicate whether he wants to deploy on live or staging. Okay, and there are different methods to do that. You can have the deployment service integrated with your Git repository. You can use a push, you can use a pull, or you can use your continuous integration tool, whatever it is, Scrutinizer, Capistrano, Bamboo, Jenkins, whatever. And you just push your final artifacts to us, and then we deploy it. So at some point, the deployment server will receive the code, whether through a push or pull or whatever. Okay, and then once you receive the code, it will turn the package, turns this code into package, which then pushed onto the S3 bucket. Okay. Now, when you are in a dedicated server or dedicated infrastructure, it's pretty easy to know where you need to deploy the code to. You know how many servers you are, you know those servers, you know their name, you know their IP addresses, and you can probably hard code these kind of things in your configuration, your tools or whatever. But when you're on cloud, it's quite different because you don't know how many servers you are. You don't know what those servers are exactly. They can come and disappear with auto scanning, all these kind of things. Everything is very, very dynamic. A common way to resolve this problem is to use the AWS EC2 API. So you can go and query, make a query and see and ask for what are the servers currently available at that point in time. We use a different tool called mCollective, which is a kind of messaging subscription tool, which allows us to, to make queries like, I want to know the admin server of the live environment, or I want to know all of the web servers currently available in this point in time on the live infrastructure or stage infrastructure, whatever. Okay. So once we discover that, so we have the list of the servers we need to deal with. So we discover the live environments and the live servers, and then we can provide to those servers an instruction to get ready for the deployment. Getting ready for the deployment means that they will fetch the code that was deployed and then pushed into S3, and this code will be pulled by the instances, okay, at that point in time. But nothing happens yet, okay? The instances are still running on the old code. Now, one of the things, as you know, that you need to do with Magento is to make sure that you run your upgrade script, and at the same time making sure that it doesn't run everywhere on all of your web servers to avoid racing conditions, which can be a problem. So what we do to avoid exactly that, we run those upgrade scripts. We identify a server, typically admin. We let the admin server to do all of their work, or upgrading scripts, or running the setup and modifying script and so on, upgrade script on the background. And as I said, the code is not live yet. Obviously, if your scripts put the database in a state which is incompatible with the current code, then you need to have a holding page while all of this happens. Okay, but if that doesn't happen, which is typically the case, everything can happen on the fly. So after the upgrade scripts have run, let's say on admin, then we send a message to all of the Magento instances, and then we tell them to switch the code from the current to the new one. Okay, and at this point, all of the requests saved on the new code, but we're not done yet. While your Magento instances are now saving their new code, also remember that there are assets like media, JavaScript, CSS, which possibly are still providing those assets from their old code. Okay, now, and that's because when you use CDN, this is what happens. In CDN, we cache those assets, and you are not able to then. You can either flush the CDN and clear the assets on the CDN, but on CloudFront, for example, this might take 10 minutes, which is not ideal at all. Now, if you use, for example, things like merge CSS and JS, That's great because that takes care of things by itself, because typically the directory path will change and that will create a new file name for the merge CSS and JS. Therefore, there is no need to clear the cache on the CDN or anything like that. Alternatively, if that's not done, you might want to do cache bursting. So you might want to somehow add some versioning in your assets. It can either be a query parameter on a URL. Very often people do that. AWS sometimes say, okay, you can also add a versioning into the path itself, which you can also do. It's not the best way, to be honest with you, but it's a way. So what you would do in this case is you would basically, as a last part of the deployment, you would change automatically. For example, you can use Mage Run and things like that, the configuration in Magento, and says that the path for the static assets is a different one from, for example, release 122 to release 123. Okay, and that does cache bursting basically for you. Okay, so all of these kind of things are taken care of. And so now the final step is, as I said, for the admin server to do eventually any update on site configuration if needed, and clear the cache, and off you go. And the last thing is, obviously, we then communicate either via Slack or email, whatever the success or maybe failure of the deployment, if that happens, and then you can roll back if something goes badly. Now, I give an example of a little story about deployment and how things can go wrong. There was a case of a client. They deployed a new version of the code, but with that, they also deployed a redesign of the site. Now, with the redesign of the site, what was happening is that they changed the size of the images. And as you know, Magento automatically resizes those images and create cache images. So as they deploy the code and new templates, we basically saw an increase in CPU utilization. Auto-scaling kicks in and new service comes in, but there wasn't enough. Auto-scaling kicks in again, more servers. We are deployed like close to 10 servers, still very high utilization on those servers. So we look in more depth and we see high usage of network and see what's going wrong here. And what we see actually then at the end is that all of the Magento servers are very, very busy in trying to resize something like 20, 40,000 different images because all of the size for all of the images has changed with the redesign of the site, which we were not aware of. The client didn't tell us about this. Now, if it was a typical dedicated infrastructure, the site would have gone dead, would have gone down, and there would be no way back until you put a holding page or something like that, and then you let those images to be resized in a more controlled manner. But be able to scale infrastructure quickly and respond to those unpredictable situations really saves the day. The site, might be a little bit slow, but it's still up. It doesn't fall down. That's one of the examples of why cloud can be extremely important. Obviously, there is much more than just that. So thank you. Sorry, as I said, I was totally completely unprepared. There wasn't my talk either, so just trying to improvise. I hope you got something out of it. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Osvaldo. Do you have any questions?
The usual thing with AWS is how do you share the media?
Yeah.
So are you using EFS at all?
Yes, EFS obviously is something we were waiting for a long time, as you can imagine. Now it's out. We are running that out. But obviously, it's not something you can just set up. We need to be extremely careful. there are so many moving parts, so many things to be concerned, from anything from security, VPC, different environments, and there are some limits and constraints about EFS that you can only discover as you start using it. Obviously, you want that to be part of the automation as well. There are, security concern, automation concern, lots of concern, but we're rolling that out. Before that, how did we do? Obviously, we could have set up our own NFS infrastructure for each client, which would have been quite costly. Also, because you don't want to just have one server for NFS. That becomes the point of failure. So you want to do high availability, and all of a sudden the cost goes up. So what we did is we actually put some magic into it. So we had an extension of Magento that we inject when the code is deployed. What this extension does is basically what we do is we store the images in the database, but those images are only stored once, used once, and then they push into S3 buckets. And then the CloudFront CDN or whatever other CDN would use the S3 as a origin to then deliver the assets. So basically, the web servers are never gets hit for serving the assets. Push to S3, and then the CDN pulls it from S3.
On the previous method, didn't the Magento database get massive? When you're looking at media in your database.
Yes, it can get massive. You can shard it if you want. If it becomes really massive, you can shard it. And there are a few other things you can do. But as I said, if the table is not really used massively, it won't have much of an impact. Honestly, we've seen it with massive sites with huge traffic, and it works perfectly fine. Just make sure you don't make use of it. That's it. You just need it once, basically. And obviously, we had to build other tools around to make sure that when an instance comes up, as you know, Magento assumes that images are on a file system. So we had to work around that. But obviously, now with EFS, we can get rid of all the kind of legacy, let's put it this way, to make life easier.
So do you handle blue-green deployments?
Yes, I mean, in a way, what I described is a blue-green deployment. It depends what you mean by blue-green deployments. If you mean by creating a completely new infrastructure and then switch at the DNS load balancer level, but in a way, what we do is blue-green deployment, because we have a secondary code, the new code waiting to be used, and once everything is done and is ready, all of the sites switch to that new version of the code.
Okay, so they are not both live at the same time?
No.
Okay. I see.
Obviously, as I said, unfortunately with Magento, there are constraints, because when you have set up and upgrade scripts running, you can end up in a situation where the new database schema or whatever change you make on the database, the new data you put in might be incompatible with the current code. As I said, typically that's not the case, but it's up to the developer to then communicate that, because if that happens, there is no other way in Magento but put a holding page. That's it. And yeah.
Sorry, I got a bit lost in the last question.
Yes.
So what you mean is that when you move from the live that you have to the new environment, to the new code.
Yeah.
You don't do any stop in the server. You move directly from one to another.
Yes.
And how do you do with the sorry for
yeah,
my,
with the op cache and
I'm
this kind of things.
developer and I always okay. So how do you move, like, how do you avoid the last orders or the last logs or the last things that happen in 1 minute before?
Well, as I said, it's all happen exactly at the same time. It's all orchestrated. So this service is very important. It communicates with all the rest. So this tells everything else when something has to happen, when, and so on. So as I said, there is a point where one of the last steps, if for Magento admin, is to everything switches, and there is a very, very short period of time. It's extremely small. Well, obviously, something can happen at that point, but typically at that point, what you need to do, the new version comes in, and you quickly clear the cache, and you make sure that they're like the config cache, for example, and all these kind of things, and you make sure that the new code is active. Make sure that you clean the op cache, for example, the kind of things.
Are you moving databases?
No. No.
Okay.
By the way, very quickly on Magento 2, because this can be a hot topic, it's slightly more complicated. I mean, the deployment process is the same at the end of the day. Nothing changes, but with Magento 2, you have development mode, production mode. There is, especially when you go through production mode, there are a number of steps you have to go through. Typically, what I would suggest, it's not too difficult. Get a nice, good, continuous integration tool, SQL CI, whatever, and go through those steps, so that you create everything that you need to create, the dependency injection, all these kind of things, and then you come out with a final artifact, which is the code that you need, and you deploy pretty much going through the same process. The only thing you need to do on the live environment is make sure that those environments are set in production mode, which is not what you do when you're developing, obviously.
Sorry, just going to the Magento you just mentioned now.
Yes.
How do you do, are you saying you can do like a blue-green development and deployment, the same process in Magento 2?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's an issue where you have to, when deploying the static assets, it's dependent on the live DB.
Yes.
Instance. So how do you ensure while you're deploying the live site is not broken?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah,
sorry.
because in Magento 2,
Yes.
when you're deploying,
Yes.
it needs a DB instance.
Yes. And that,
yeah, and it requires your.
that's part of the continuous integration that you need to set up. Basically, as you make all the compiling, all this kind of thing, you create the assets and so on. Make sure you do all of that into.
No,
yeah.
so Magento 2, if you're upgrading to version 0.10.
Yes.
And you're upgrading to 0.20, and your current version is 0.1.
Yeah.
And if you're saying you're going to run, you're going to deploy on, what can I say? Sorry, let's say you're going to finish up your deployment. It will upgrade the DB to 0.20.
Mm-hmm.
But the current version of your live site is still running on 1.0, and as a result, your live site is going to break. So how do you resolve that kind of issue?
As I said, if there is, if I understand the question correctly, if you're talking about incompatibility between the state of the database,
the state of the database,
and the new code, and the old code,
yes,
because you have to run the scripts, the change takes place, but you still running the old code. As I said, typically there should not be an issue. It is up to the developers to raise that as a potential issue, and if that's the case, the only way out is to put a holding page. So you need to do, when you do deployment, you put a holding page.
Okay.
I mean,
that's not kind of like a blue-green if you're going to be.
No, this is still the case, and you can't get away from it, unfortunately. So again, it's very important that operations and developers talk to each other.
I'm just trying to understand the fact that if there's a process where you will not have to put the holding page, if there's a process you can go through where you wouldn't have to put on the holding page.
No, if you get into the kind of incompatibility state, there is not a way with Magento. With other system, you could do these kind of things, but with Magento you can't.
You can do that quite easily in Magento 1, but in Magento 2, every deployment is dependent on an instance of the DB. Like you can't build your static asset without a DB instance. In Magento 2, you can't do a lot of things without the database connection, which you can't do easily in Magento 1. But in Magento 2, so it's quite really tricky.
As I said, typically in Magento 2, when you do in production mode, what we said, we never had this problem. So what we typically ask is to let the continuous integration to produce all of the assets, to go through the company and all these kind of things, and what we get out of the continuous integration is the final code with everything that you need.
Yeah, but while you're running that, your front end is good, your life site.
No, this is happening somewhere else.
But
it's not happening on the live site.
But you have to use the same database which the live site is using.
Yeah, what we do typically, we provided the developers a copy. Obviously, they have a copy of the live database, sanitized, and all these kind of things.
But if you have a large, massive database, you can't do that.
Well, you don't need everything, so you can sanitize the database. You don't have to provide all the customers or the orders and all the kind of things.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.